Hello, everyone. I'm Sharon O'Brien here with my colleague and Education Director, Laurie Presbus. We are with the Catholics for Family Peace, and we are so delighted that Jenny Schottler and the committee invited us to be with you this morning. We are also delighted that people of other faiths are with you there in Wheeling, Charleston. We have worked for almost 2 decades with our interfaith colleagues on this issue, and we've learned so much from them. So we are very grateful that you're there and that we have been founding members of the National Interfaith Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We've been asked to begin today's program by sharing 2 things: what Catholics believe about intimate partner abuse and how we respond to the issue. After our remarks, a number of colleagues will describe exactly what partner violence is and what local services and legal options exist. But we begin today because in our experience, women of faith, Catholic or otherwise, oftentimes believe that they must tolerate the abuse and stay in an abusive marriage, that separation and divorce are unacceptable. However, Laurie Presbus, a theologian, will share information that makes it clear that abuse and violence is never acceptable in a relationship, starting from dating and beyond. So Laurie's going to continue by highlighting several documents that address the issue, and then I'll conclude by telling you what we're doing to address the issue. Dr. Presbus, please share your information.
Thank you. So Catholic teaching on domestic violence begins with the book of Genesis, in which we read, "In the image of God, God created them. Male and female, God created them." This is the strongest reference for the equal dignity of men and women upon which Catholic teaching in this matter is founded. We also acknowledge that, as the Catechism puts it, there exist also sinful inequalities that affect millions of men and women. These are in open contradiction to the gospel. Their equal dignity as persons demands that we strive for fairer and more humane conditions. The Bible is a foundational teaching, and also the whole Catholic tradition, that is, the authoritative teachings of our bishops and Pope. Our U.S. bishops have written an informative and compassionate pastoral statement called "When I Call for Help, a Pastoral Response to Violence Against Women," that puts our teaching clearly. They say we condemn the use of the Bible to support abusive behavior in any form. And they call us to a correct reading of Scripture, which leads people to the understanding of the equal dignity of men and women and to relationships based on mutuality and love. Sometimes people misunderstand biblical passages such as "Wives, be submissive to your husbands" from the letter to the Ephesians. They interpret them wrongly, though, calling that they think that it calls for domination and submission. A full understanding includes the previous verse of that letter: "Be submissive to each other out of reverence for Christ." The Apostle Paul teaches the church, "Complete my joy by being of the same mind, the same love, united in heart, thinking one thing." We're called to love one another with mutual affection and anticipate one another in showing honor. Our church teaches about marriage as mutuality and respect between spouses. Husbands and wives are called to this partnership because of their dignity in God. While many spouses understand this call and about equal authority in marriage, others enter marriage with destructive attitudes about how men and women should relate to each other. We teach that marriage does not mean accepting abuse. Acting to end the abuse does not violate the marriage promises, says the teaching of our church, and that no person is expected to stay in an abusive marriage. The law of our church is very clear that if someone is being abused, they have a legitimate cause for leaving, either by permission of the local ordinary or even on his or her own authority if there's danger of delay. And so safety is the primary concern. Pope Francis has written and spoken many times about the problem of domestic violence in his encyclical, The Joy of the Gospel, in his writing about how we're all brothers and sisters, Fratelli Tutti, and especially in The Joy of Love, also known by its Latin title, Amoris Laetitia. He talks about how this problem is impacting not just families, but the whole society, and reiterates our foundational teaching about seeking safety, and that we must have empathy for people that are forced to leave their common life because of abuse. And it calls for pastoral care for those people, particularly those who face economic and other hardships. We recognize that violence in the home has an effect on society as a whole. Faith leaders are called to be first responders very often. Few survivors do seek help, but half of those who do talk to clergy. Why do they talk to the clergy? Well, they feel that they're safe, trustworthy, and clergy have an opportunity in many occasions for people to talk to them, even if that wasn't the problem that they thought they were going to help with. And it's not just clergy, but all people of faith are called to be faith leaders, because that's how people see us in the eyes of our friends and acquaintances. They know that we're praying people. What can you do when someone reaches out to you and confides in you? First, listen and believe them. Respect their choices. Don't say to them, well, you have to get out of there. You must leave. Be aware that they might not see themselves as being abused. Affirm their right to be safe and refer them to domestic violence professional. Inform yourself about the resources in your community and determine if you're a mandated reporter. Likely not, because that only generally applies to people who are teaching children, but you'll want to determine whether or not in your profession you're a mandated reporter. Some things to say to people when they turn to you: that it's not God's will for you, that I'm concerned about you, and that you're not alone. Say that you don't deserve this and it's not your fault. Provide some helpful information. You can also say, let's pray together. One of the resources that Catholics for Family Peace provides on our website are prayer resources for praying for others and praying for oneself when you're under stress. And we invite you to join us at 3 p.m. every day to pray for people affected by domestic abuse. So a summary of Catholic teaching on this subject: every person has innate dignity, the equality of men and women. God desires happiness and peace for all people. We teach that no one must stay in an unsafe situation. We also believe in redemption, that God's mercy endures forever, and people can change with God's help. Next, Dr. O'Brien will share with us some of the concrete things that Catholics are doing to address this issue.
Thanks, Laurie, for that information. So what are we doing? In our experience, the Catholic response sits on a continuum of either increasing awareness, becoming aware that it's a problem, providing education, such as what you're doing today, or you're actually doing both of those, increasing awareness and providing education. Providing services, which the colleagues who are going to be speaking provide services to your community. And then services, information, resources in the recovery process afterwards, which might mean transitional housing or information about divorce recovery. It could mean any number of things. But responses tend to lie on along that continuum. And there are, so we want to tell you about ourselves, because this is what we do. We share teaching as well as encourage people to respond. And you can visit the website from the Vatican's office on laity, family, and life that lists us as a best practice. And it's an easy description of what we do. So I invite you to check that out. Also, we partner with other organizations that address the issue. The World Union of Catholic Women's Organizations, it's a group of 162 countries that have this as a priority. More lay organizations, including Christian family movements, the National Council of Catholic Women. There are any number of groups that address this issue, and we partner with them. In addition to lay organizations, our primary collaboration is indeed with dioceses, because we offer them programs. And a key program we offer is they're joining the National Catholic Partners for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, where dioceses and lay organizations commit to arranging, hosting an annual mass and educational events on domestic abuse, such as what you're doing today. Another key program that people really like is we've created a domestic violence awareness in marriage prep program. It's free and downloadable, and we invite you to check it out. So we do a number of things, but there are a number of dioceses across the country that do things as well. So we want to highlight 4 of them. So we'll start with Catholic Charities USA provides a whole range of services, primarily. So we do education and awareness, but they provide services such as counseling or shelters or transitional housing. Those are their expertise lies in that. The Archdiocese of Chicago has been at this as long as we have, since 2010. And their specialty is helping teenagers recognize what is a healthy relationship. Because wouldn't it be nice if we knew that early on? That's one of their key aspects. The Archdiocese of Washington is very parish-based focused. And if you check out their website, which you'll discover that. And then, of course, what you're doing here, the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston. So these efforts, what Chicago is doing and Washington is doing, it all started with a program similar to what you're doing today, where people gather, they're learning, figuring out what to do next. And we commend you for what you're doing, and we really commend you for making it an interfaith focus, because there's a lot of strength in that, as well as, of course, bringing in your local professionals. So it's been a pleasure to be with you for these few minutes to primarily make the point that faith is a resource. It's not a roadblock to addressing domestic abuse. That, as Laurie clearly stated, people are expected to seek safety and healing. And we would be glad to discuss this further with you, but we wanted to make that point as Jenny and the committee requested. Feel free to contact us anytime. This is our information, catholicsforfamilypeace.org. We wish you well with the rest of your program. Good day.
Our first speaker will be Laurie Jones, from the Executive Director of Wheeling YWCA.
Good morning. Thank you for addressing this issue. It is 20 women a minute are abused in the United States. 20 women a minute are abused in the United States, and 137 across the United States are killed a day. That's pretty stark statistics. The YWCA Wheeling provides the domestic violence shelter in the northern panhandle of West Virginia. We serve Ohio, Marshall, and Wetzel counties. We provide emergency hotline, 24 hours answered by a person. Like I said, the domestic violence shelter, court support, teen dating violence advocates in high schools in Marshall County, Ohio County, Wetzel County. We do have transitional housing for women after they've been in the emergency safe shelter. If they need additional support, they can live there for up to 2 years rent-free while they are working on reestablishing themselves. We have Batterers Intervention and Prevention Program, which is an educational course, 32-week educational course for men who batter. It's court-ordered. We've had the highest success rate in the state of West Virginia with our Batterers Intervention course. But we also have a focus group, which is women who batter, because women batter as well. And that is a women-led educational course, behavior modification for women. There's support group in each of the counties, Ohio, Marshall, and Wetzel. We collaborate with everyone who is sitting at the table or in front of you with, legal aid, Ohio County Prosecutor's Office. Erica's Harley is our support group facilitator, and we just collaborate with everyone and anyone that we can in the Northern Panhandle who will help women advance themselves. Not sure. Do monitored visitation and exchange, and that is also court-ordered in Ohio County, Ohio, Marshall, and Wetzel counties. I think that's, I'm sure that there's more. That is what comes to mind. I thank you for having me.
Thank you very Next, we have Shelly Earnest, who is the Victim Witness Coordinator of Ohio County, the Ohio County Prosecutor's Office.
Hello, I'm Shelly Earnest with the Ohio County Prosecutor's Office. I am the Victim Witness Coordinator. So I work in the Prosecutor's Office, and we deal with all of the cases or any domestic violence cases that come through the court system. I work with the victim. The thing that's probably the biggest difference between my program and the Y is that I am not confidential. The Y, everything that gets told to the Y advocate, they are confidential. Anything that a victim says to me, I have to let the prosecutor know because that could be used during the court hearing. I'm going to bring Gail Kale up. He is the assistant prosecutor who handles all of the domestic violence cases in our county. He's a wealth of knowledge. Come on up, Gail.
I'm just gonna jump in there.
Yeah. we tag team a lot,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we work together.
So my name's Gail Kale. I've been a domestic violence prosecutor for about 18 years. And before that, I don't know how I got involved in a lot of civil litigation regarding some pretty horrendous domestic violence situations where there were multiple homicides and, survivors attempting to place blame on police agencies, police officers, stuff like that. So I've been working in the field of domestic violence for a long time. And as a prosecutor in domestic violence, you measure your goals and your successes on a extremely different level than your traditional, let's say, street crime prosecutor. So I like to use real-world examples to explain that. Years ago, my brother, who's a pharmacist, he had a couple drugstores, retail drugstores in town. So he was working at one of the drugstores, and a guy comes in, asked for a pack of Marlboros because they sold smokes. So he turned around, grabbed a pack of smokes, and he saw a giant, gun stuck on his nose. And he said, "Okay, I want all the scheduled drugs. Get down there. or I'm going to blow your brains out. And he quickly emptied all the drugs, and he had actually a gun in the cabinet. He gave the guy a bag with all the drugs and the gun. The guy said, now count to 1,000 or you're going to die. So he hit the alarm button, the cops came, what have you. That particular robber was never prosecuted. But had that person been apprehended, I assure you that my brother would have been in contact with the police and the prosecutors to ensure that the guy that, crammed a gun in his face would have met with justice. And my job, every morning before court scheduled, I look over the police reports from the weekend, in particular domestic violence incidents. And they go anywhere from on the continuum from somebody smacking or spitting on or pushing a loved one up to sexual assaults, burglaries, even homicides. It runs the whole gamut. And not homicides, but all the way up to that, inevitably, Monday morning, not this Monday because it's a court holiday, but Tuesday morning, I'll see the reports, and I will receive 2 to 3 calls from victims who were brutalized, injured, things like this, to the effect of, well, Gail, there's a plethora of excuses. The police said if I didn't write that down and say to my husband did that, I was going to go to jail. It's really my fault because I did things to set him off. This is an isolated circumstance. Everything in the police report is a lie. So, and fathom taking, this kind of stuff to trial. My brother would never call up and say, you know what, when that guy stuck the gun in my face and asked for all my drugs, he was just having a really bad day. You don't hear that from stranger crime victims. You don't hear the victim of a burglary who somebody broke in her house and stole all her stuff and said, well, that guy was having a really bad day. He really doesn't deserve. But you do hear that on at least half, probably closer to 75% of your domestic abuse cases, because the abuse and the violence is coming at the hands of somebody who allegedly is in love with the victim, and the victim is allegedly in love with the abuser. If on the first date, husband and wife go out on a first date, at the end of that date, he said, you know what, you're a fat slut, and you need to lose some weight, and backhanded her, that would have been the end of the relationship. Well, why should it be any different 10 years down the road? And it happens. The words like that, and a lot, I see a really bad stuff. And our job is to ensure that there's some sort of justice, and our job is to ensure that we don't see those same faces again in a bad situation, such as injured or worse, killed. And I tell this to the victims. I said, my job isn't not necessarily to ensure that your husband, because I know that you're going to be back together. This relationship oftentimes is not going to be over. My job is to ensure that I don't want to look at autopsy photos of your body, because that's a lot more work for me to prosecute a homicide, and I'm kind of lazy. I don't want to do it. So what we do, we try to, as much as possible, focus on the behaviors of the abuser in the criminal justice system. Counsel and defense lawyers who are representing persons accused of this behavior, they want to focus on the behaviors of the victim. To say, well, she aggravated him into doing this. And I use he and she because probably 90% of the cases I have are male versus female violence. But you get it in homosexual relationships, you get in female versus male as well. But the vast majority of the cases we see, it's a male-female relationship, and it's male versus female. So we try to, as much as possible, focus our energies and our views on the criminalized behaviors of the bad guy, and do what we can particularly in those situations where we know that that relationship is going to be reunited, to do things, to put things in place, safety plans, get abusers into the BIPS program. If they need to go to jail or prison, they go to jail or prison. And I'm probably the only prosecutor in the office that the victim input, a lot of times, we're going to go to trial. What does the victim want to happen in this case? The victim wants this case to be thrown out. The victim does not want this case to go to trial. The victim does not want the abuser to go to prison, despite the fact that he's been convicted of this multiple times over, despite the fact that he may have, I've seen a lot of bad stuff, broken bones, lacerations, sexual assaults, just horrendous abuse, stuff that you wouldn't do to a dog, and they do to their loved ones, and the loved one comes back. And it's, that's what you've got to do sometimes. But the goal, in my position, and I think the goal of Shelly and I working together, is not necessarily, oh, we got another conviction, let's rack it up, man. That's it. The goal is, we're not going to see that abused party ever again in a bad way. So that's what we do. Thanks.
And I think I want to add in there too, I think a lot of people on the outside say, well, why would somebody come and say, drop those charges, Shelly, we don't want him in trouble. The main reason is usually the male's the breadwinner, so they need him to be there to pay the rent, they need somebody to help out with the kids, he might be the only transportation. So with that, then you have to kind of like look outside our office and go to other organizations and agencies in the area and tell that victim, let's go try, we'll get you set up with a bus pass, we'll get you housing up at the Y, we can help with childcare, we'll get you situated. A lot of them will say, well, I don't have a way to court. We have transportation, we'll come pick you up and bring you into court. Our office is a strict no drop policy. So if something happens over the weekend and they call me Monday morning wanting to drop the charges, what I always tell them is you have to come to court the first day. The first time we have court, you have to come so we can all sit down and talk about it. Because sometimes we have to assume that the defendant is maybe telling the victim, call her and drop those charges. I need to be back in the house. Call and tell her it didn't happen that way. So we always have to assume that they're being pressured or pressured into calling and asking for the charges to be dropped. So I think we work pretty well of including the victim in their input, but they don't have the final say in what's going to happen.
Thank you both very much. Next, we have Andrew Hahn of West Virginia Legal Aid, and he'll tell us a little bit about what he does. And Andrew will be available for the question and answer period if we have any questions, or all of the speakers will be available at that point.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Hahn. I'm a staff attorney at the Legal Aid of West Virginia. We're a nonprofit law firm with offices throughout the state of West Virginia. My office is here in Wheeling, right on Main Street. We do have programs for survivors and victims of domestic violence to come seek legal representation. Now, unlike the presentation you heard from Gail and Shelly, they work on the criminal side of things. I work on the civil side. And under West Virginia law, there are civil remedies for people who are going through domestic violence, and that's through the protective order process. The protective order process is temporary. It lasts, when I say temporary, it only lasts from 90 days to 6 months, in special circumstances up to a year. But like Laurie said, we work together with the YWCA to get referrals to come to our office, and we try to help them the best we can. Some of the differences that how we operate is that as an attorney and as a victim or survivor comes to my door, we establish what we call an attorney-client privilege. So everything they tell me is confidential. I cannot release it. And I act in the best interest of them, okay? And sometimes they might not want to go forward. And they say, I don't want to go with this protective order for a lot of reasons, okay? Of course, I'm advising them to do what I think is best for them, but they're the client, I'm their attorney, I do what's best for them. If they're asking me to maybe go a different path, then we have to do that. I can't force them into a situation. But one of the things that I want to reiterate is that at the Legal Aid of West Virginia, we also not only handle protective orders, we'll also help people get out of certain situations, divorce if it's needed, custody, if custody is always an issue when it comes to family law cases, especially in cases where there's family violence, that becomes a main priority for a lot of our clients. There's one thing I do want to say about this particular event in this particular month, Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It is a thing that plagues families throughout all the nations, throughout this nation, and it doesn't matter what race, creed, or gender you are. It affects everyone. And what I've seen in my practice is how devastating domestic violence is to the family and to the children. And they suffer consequences beyond just the case. I might have the case for a year, maybe 6 months, but the family members, especially the children, are affected years down the line, and it affects how they relate to other people. One of the things that we do provide, again, other than legal services, we will make sure that you're getting criminal assistance. Criminal assistance basically means if there is a companion criminal case and they need someone to kind of advocate for them, if they're unable to say everything they want to say to the prosecutor, or they have just questions about the criminal process, and they just feel comfortable with me because I'm the first person that they've spoken to, I'll tell them to the best of my knowledge of what to expect. I have done it before. We do that. We provide that service where we will kind of walk them through the criminal process in partnership with the prosecutor's office, letting them, obviously advising them that it's their discretion and they're the ones that take the lead. Okay, but my job is to help them understand the process itself. I just want to thank Ginny for allowing me to come present today. I was a last-minute addition. I saw this in the Catholic newspaper, and I said, this is something that I think we should get involved in. I called her, and she was so gracious, so I thank you for allowing me to come speak today. I'll be here for any Q&A afterward. Again, thank you for this time, and thank you, Bishop Brennan, for putting this on.
Now I'd like to turn the program over to Lanny Sacco. He will introduce our remaining guests, and he will lead the question and answer period.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Bishop Brennan, for hosting this or sponsoring this. And while our numbers are not what we anticipated, I'm not devastated by that, because I think that no matter what we do about such a delicate topic like this, it is you will carry it on. We're spreading the message that never, never, never can domestic violence be tolerated. And we must recognize the pervasive nature of domestic violence. As this fellow just indicated, developmentally, it affects children, it affects families, it affects communities. It doesn't stop with just the victim or the perpetrator of violence. It's pervasive. So that's the message, and never, never, never do we want it to be tolerated. Never can it be tolerated under any circumstances. For those of us who think that because of Catholic teaching you must tolerate that in a situation, you just heard how wrong that is. It's never, never tolerable. The difficulty for us is to see that people who are in that situation seem to feel that that is their expectation, or that if they stay long enough, they will bring about the perpetrator will change, or they will convert him, or some other thing will happen. And often that happens at the risk of themselves, the psychological damage as well as the physical damage that has been pointed out by the prosecutor's office are just rampant. I have been in the field of mental health for longer than most of you. Some of you are old, but I've worked in several different. Hi, Erica. Some of you have. Some of you. Eric, to give you an example of how old I am, Erica's mother taught my children in high school. So, anyway, the nature of and one of the things up here I want to mention here that we kind of glossed over is that you heard in the presentation, I believe it was on the slideshow, about a mandated reporter. Those mental health professionals who are licensed and are providing services are mandated by law to report these incidents. If you do not report them, you can lose your license to practice as a mental health clinician. So that's very fundamental. And what we do in the field of mental health is we often say to the person seeking services, if you're going to tell me this, I have to tell you that I'm a mandated reporter. And that's a huge hurdle in the field of mental health because lots of folks will then close down and don't want to do it. But you have to really understand that this is something that you're doing for safety. We are about keeping people safe. And we need to educate our victims that they are in a very, very difficult situation, and we want them to understand that they have the right and the inherent right to be safe. Oftentimes, they do not feel that or expect that. They think it's their duty to put up with this, to put up with the abuse. Whether you're male or female, that's not the case. So it requires a great deal of education to let the person know that you don't have to do this. Now, who are we to say, how are you going to live? What's going to be your livelihood? All of those things have to be worked out. So it's not just a very simple task to say, I'm going to report this to keep you safe, because this mother who's coming in and maintaining that she's abused might be the mother of 3 or 4 children. How am I going to feed them? What's going to happen? Very basic issues that have to be addressed and consoled. And there are resources in the community that can help, but it's a huge hurdle for victims, and I don't want to underplay that. Okay, I don't need to get carried away with my own vendetta about these issues because they are very, very, very crucial, and I applaud all of you for being here, and thank you, and then take the message out. When you hear the situation, do what you saw in the video. Tell people that they are entitled. Talk to them. Listen to them. Listening is more important than talking. Listening is more important than talking. My parents would not believe that I'm a listener, but it's really fundamental to doing anything when we work with people, is that we must listen to them. Listen to them and listen to what they don't say verbally. So be aware of what you see is also listening. All right, my task up here was to also introduce 2 other people on our panel that aren't going to give presentations. I'm very pleased on my right to the far end is B.L. Edmonson, who has been a clinician in the field of mental health for a number of years. B.L. is a licensed clinical social worker. She's also a licensed addictions counselor and has been serving this community for a number of years. She currently works for Ohio Valley Guidance Services as an outpatient mental health therapist. And she has lots of information and can facilitate a lot of answers to those of you who have questions about how perhaps drugs and alcohol play into abuse. And that's kind of something that we didn't address today because there's so much that we need to get in. The BL is very skilled in that. Next to her is Reverend Erica Harley, who is the minister at Advance Presbyterian Church. She has been involved in the community of social action since she's been at Advance, I believe. She has provided much in the way of domestic violence in her community and comes to us to participate on this panel with a lot of work in that area. So thank you both for coming, and thank all of you for being here. At this point in time, we're hoping that we can have some questions about issues that perhaps that you feel that you'd like to address to anybody. If you have any questions, please bring them forth or let me know what they are. Are there any questions? Ginny.
A friend of mine was telling me about an abusive relationship that her daughter had experienced. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Anyway, and it was 6 years, and she still hasn't emotionally recovered from that. So my question is, how long does it typically take a person? Does a person ever really recover from that?
Would somebody like to handle that? Erica? Neil? Sorry.
Did you hear what she said?
No, I could not.
She said that she knows someone who was in an abusive relationship, after 6 years, she still doesn't really seem recovered. How long does it take to recover?
Well, the interesting thing is that so often, so many times, I think that many batterers are very charismatic and charming, and at first, I think some individuals are very flattered that this person is a little jealous because it can be interpreted as that person really cares. However, as time goes on, the need to control by those who batter, intensifies. And it takes a good while for victims/survivors to realize that they're in a deep corner and that they need help getting out because they cannot do that alone. And it takes a lot of courage to reach out for help. It takes a lot of courage to even disclose to family members or close friends that this controlling situation is getting worse and worse. And before you know it, they're in the middle of a sea that they can't swim out alone. So it takes education, time, support. I always teach those who are being abused to gather their acorns discreetly. Discretion is very, very important because as the individual gets stronger and demonstrates some independence, courage, their likelihood of being killed or permanently maimed intensifies and increases. So when you're helping someone, you have to teeter on discretion, and sometimes that becomes a problem. So it takes a lot of time for some individuals because some don't realize that jealousy and control will intensify as time goes on. So I don't think there's any timeline per se that I've seen. Each person has an individual timeline.
Thank you. I want to reiterate that. I don't think there's a specific timeline for any one individual that you can say, oh, in 5 years or 4 years. I'm probably also willing to go out on a limb and say that someone who has been so horrendously abused physically as well as psychologically, that you really never totally get over that and function totally independently from that. But what I think we have to do is to try to help people reach a functional level where they can function better and feel safe. But I don't think you ever really get over the ramifications of what you've experienced. That's just my personal view. If you can help people to function better and to feel safe better and to talk more and to relate more in the community, I think that's an appropriate goal. I hope that helps your question there and helps the person who is bothered by the fact that it's taken so long. You can't say that in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, it's all going to be gone and be better when someone appears something so horrific.
Well, and a lot of times we follow the same patterns. Right. So if I've been victimized for a long period of time, it changes the way I think. I don't have confidence anymore, right. So I seek out the same type of man. So there's a lot of repetitive behaviors. It becomes who we are and how we self-identify.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Yes.
My question is for Laurie. I'm very interested in some of the programs that you mentioned you do that are helpful with re-education of perpetrators. Can you tell us more about that and what helps those changes to take root?
It's education. 32 weeks, and there's someone from law enforcement as well as the trained batterers intervention facilitators. It's educating men on the effects that they're having on their family, and they actually get to see it over the 32 weeks. It's a build-on a program that actually builds each week on top of each other.
If I could chime in.
You've been
Most of the people in that are court ordered to be in that Batters Intervention Prevention Program. It's called BIPS. It's based on standard. It goes all across the country. And we try to use discretion. I try to use discretion onto the people that get court-ordered into that program, because when you're in the criminal justice field, I hate to say this, but some people you can't fix. They're just troublemakers. You can tag somebody who maybe has a criminal record of 100 pages long. You don't want to stick that person into a BIPS program because you know they're going to be disruptive and disrupt the entire situation. So we try to I hate to say it, some people you can't fix, and you don't want to put that person into the program. Yeah, so we try to use discretion on people that we believe are going to actually learn from the program and become better people at the conclusion of the program. And I think Laurie said in her presentation, across the state, and I don't know even what the statistics are, but traditionally our BIPS program has the lowest reoffender rate, at least across the state. I don't know where it ranks nationally, which is a good thing, because that means if they're not reoffending, that means people aren't getting hurt.
And if I could just add something into with the BIPS classes, is that it's just not relationships with the husband and wife. It's the relationship that the husband might have with his children, the relationship that the husband may have with his children, his job, his employer, people he works with, his coworkers, his friends. So it's other relationships, just not the abuse with his wife.
And some people, they refer to this class as anger management. It's not an anger management class at all. It's a coping situation, how to cope with your behaviors, as opposed to, it's not anger management. You're going to get mad. You're going to get angry. But it's how you deal with it as a
Behavior modification. We're trying to teach you other
yes.
outlets.
It's behavior modification to use other coping strategies. Yes, yes, and the guys that come out of there that inevitably. Guys get ordered into that program, they drag their feet, they don't want to go, they think it's a bunch of nonsense. And I've talked to a lot of them that get out of it and go, man, I'm so glad I got ordered to do this, because it's really changed my life and I've opened my eyes up, which is good.
Erica, I'm wondering if you could just shed some light on how the clergy responds in this community to domestic violence, or what has been your experience as a clergy person to this issue?
As a clergy person, my experience has been very little. Very little, quite frankly. As a member of the community and somebody who gets paid, is fortunate enough to get paid to serve on community service boards, it's been a lot. So I'm the president of the board of Tri-County Help. I'm on the Y board, which led to Laurie saying, hey, will you come and lead this domestic violence support group that we have every week? And I'm very clear with them to say, I am not a licensed counselor. I am a pastoral counselor. I'm a pastor. So I have some skills in the counseling area, but there are certain things I can't sign off on, and certain skills that I don't have that you all do. In the church, domestic violence is still a great silence, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons we're sitting here today, is the bishop is trying to highlight something that is huge and a huge problem, and affects lots of people in our congregations as well as in our society, and yet we very seldom ever talk about it. And so, applause for the church for bringing this up. And we've got to keep going now. Like, okay, we've shown a little light on something. What do we do now?
That's right.
Now, we've said, hey, here's a problem. How do we address it?
Thank you. Okay, I think I would be remiss to say that, like, right now, in the midst of this pandemic, one of the things that I want to mention too is that globally, we've seen a 28% increase in major depressive disorders across the world. We've seen a 26% increase in anxiety disorders across the world. Subsequently, we've also seen, and I forget the percentage actually, it just escaped me, would you believe this, of the increase in domestic violence across the world during the pandemic. So this time, this crisis that we're experiencing globally, this pandemic, has heightened many of these social ills that are confronting us. So like Erica just said, we're aware of it, we're bringing it out to the public. Where do we go now? Where do we go now? This is something we don't want to tolerate. This is something that's inexcusable, something that makes us sick to our stomach when we read about it and hear about it. We have to keep going. We have to understand that it is our job. I remember once when I was very pleased about the fact that I was taking a course and the instructor said to me, now you have this information, you just can't sit on it because that makes you responsible. That makes you responsible. So we now have a responsibility because we've become aware of the fact that this exists in our community. We've had this esteemed panel tell us about what's going on in our community. Just briefly, I think that the prosecutor's office as well could probably, and the YW could do a whole day long on tell us what they've confronted, as well as everyone here could. So it is our responsibility as people of this community, as Christians, as Catholics, as Protestants, as human beings, to relate to one another in the most typical way to provide safety. And the question that first prompted this was, how long does it take to overcome this? I think only God knows, because I think it's an individual thing for people to overcome, and I think that from my perspective, I met people that came to me in their late 70s seeking help because they could not forget the abuse they encountered when they were 18 or 19. They function throughout the world. So that's just an example of, and I was like, whoa, this happened to you 50-some years ago. I remember saying that in my naivete to a patient. Yes. And she said, and I've lived with it all of my life. So when you talk about the ramifications of abuse and the ramifications of violence, it is horrific, my friends. It is horrific.
Lanny, can I say one other thing?
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, your children and I were in school together, but I've been doing this work for about 30 years at this point. So,
Tell everyone how old I am.
right, yeah. Not how old I am, because my birthday was yesterday. You can't know. When I started this work a long time, decades ago, we used to say to women, if you're getting beat up, get out. No matter what, get out. We don't really say that anymore. Because now what we say is, get a plan and get out.
That's right.
And all your talk about safety prompted me that in our well-intentions, we might say to somebody, just get out. But, you know, I can't tell you the number of women that come into the Y and that we work with, and their first, I don't know, 6 weeks probably there, we're trying to get them a Social Security card, a driver's license, a birth certificate. You know what you can do in this society without those things? Not one damn thing. You can't get a job, you can't rent a house, you can't even get a car to drive away from him. You can't do anything without those things. So, you know, you got to think before you just leave about where are the kids going to go? Do I have any money? Can I take any money? Where are my important documents? How am I going to get money? You know, what's going to happen to the pets? One of the big things that happens is abusers like to kill pets because they mean something to their owners.
That's right.
Right? And there are not very many pet-friendly shelters anywhere. That's a downfall for us. It's something we got to work on. So, you know, in your good intentions, if you encounter someone who is abused and going through this, please don't just say to her, well, you got to leave. He can't knock you around. That's just wrong.
No, that's true.
No. Make sure they get a plan to get out.
And I just touched on that briefly when I was telling you about how difficult it is for victims to leave. It's not oftentimes that they feel like they love it is often that they love this person perhaps may love them, but their safety has to be primary. But as Erica said, what has to be developed, and why we encourage you to make referrals to professionals or to other agencies, is to help people get a plan, because you cannot just pick up and leave and go with nowhere to go. That's irresponsible. That's what the victim would think. How could I leave my children? How could I feed them? I don't have any kind of training to work, or I don't have, all of those things that she pointed out are very fundamental. And to us, who come from a middle-class background, sometimes we think that is very basic, and we forget about that. We forget about the very fundamental things in our society that many people don't have. So I encourage you that when you come across somebody, listen, and refer them, talk to them, support, tell them to develop a plan with their professional person. There are many people in the community. All of these people up here are just a smidgen of people in this community. These people can get those folks help. If they can't provide it, they will refer. So all of us can do that, anyone. Are there any other questions or comments from this group?
I would say the average person leaves 8 times before they leave for good.
8?
No, 8. That means somebody left the first time, and somebody it took many times. So each time they're getting stronger, and it may be that they're saving some money. They're getting their identification. They're getting their children's school records or something like that.
They may be developing a plan.
They're developing a plan. In Ohio County, the YWCA alone, and everyone does not come to the YWCA. Some people just go straight to the prosecutor's office or through law enforcement. Everybody doesn't reach out to us. But we statistically help over 1,600 women, children, and men each year. 2 years ago, there were as many children in our domestic violence shelter as there were women.
And no pets.
And no pets. We refer out.
I just want to add the seriousness of talking to or being aware that domestic violence occurs. The BIPS program is a great program to help those abusers, but a lot of those abusers have been abused, and so if as a community we don't do our part in trying to kind of stop this here and now, and not recognizing or not listening and referring the people that we know are going through this stuff, it just kind of feeds itself over and over again. For those young kids who witness these things in the household, they didn't want to witness it, but they've seen it. And that's what kind of causes trauma. And that trauma translates into how they relate to other people in the future. And sometimes, for the vast majority, sadly, I think the statistics are a lot of those who are domestic violence abusers have either witnessed or have been abused in their childhood. And so it kind of goes back to my point where, when we talk about it affects the children, it affects the children, it affects generations. And so that's why it's so important to try to really stop or do what we can to prevent as much of this as possible.
So what are some unmet community needs?
Bishop, do you have a question?
Yes, this is a parish program today, okay? But later this month, we'll be having 2 gatherings of our Catholic clergy from the entire state, and we'll also have presentations on domestic violence, okay? One in Charleston, one in Morgantown. We're also going to have, this topic is going to be dealt with our school personnel and our parish personnel, the secretaries, bookkeepers, those who work in our parish offices. Because sometimes they can pick up things and become aware of things, right? One thing I would ask the panelists, whoever feels competent to answer this, is what are kind of typical signs that might indicate a person is involved in a domestic violence situation, okay? So again, my first one I ever involved in, I told something about in my homily, an early one, but that, not that one, but another one where a woman asked me to want to speak about a problem in the family, whatever, and it was summertime, and she had a long sleeve shirt on, which is a little unusual in the summertime, okay? Could they be covering bruises? Okay, so it turned out she was a victim of domestic violence. The husband was a high-profile federal official, eventually lost his position because this became notorious, his abuse of his wife. But there were signs there, not just that, but the connection with the children, that I could see that he was kind of rough on they had 4 boys, and kind of rough on them, okay? So, but I didn't know enough at that time. It was Sharon O'Brien that we heard the video from, that she helped me to learn about a lot about this topic of domestic violence. But what signs do you would see that someone comes in and talk to the parish, to arrange for something, the parish secretary, and just something or looks a certain way? Can you say are particular signs that might indicate this person is involved in a domestic violence situation? What could you say about that? What signs are there?
I think with technology, you get all the classic signs like, injuries that are explained with bad explanations, but a big thing with technology anymore, we'll see it in our office, is the need for the victim to constantly be checking in with the abuser, because it's all about power and control. So the abuser needs to know at every second who they're talking to, what they're doing, why they're at that location. So if you have somebody who incessantly has to check in constantly with their spouse or with their significant other and let them know where they are, what they're doing, and get permission to go somewhere, that to me, with technology the way it is something that I say, wow, that's it. And Shelly, I know Shelly has been in a particularly bad situation and was talking to a victim about what was going to happen with the case or something, and the victim had the phone up like this, like taping, to prove that she was at the prosecutor's office telling the victim witness coordinator, oh, things didn't really occur like it says in the police report. So with technology, you see a lot more of that. It's changing even from 25 years ago. But I think that's a big one in my experience, is the need to constantly check in with your cell phone with the abuser.
I think perpetrators always did that. I think what the difference is now, it's obvious that they're doing it because of the technology. Yeah.
And also, the victim's life becomes narrower, smaller, because the perpetrator generally begins to peel away and take things away from this person that he or she is trying to control. Opens their mail and surveils their communication by phone, starts to chase their friends away, finding flaws in their, maybe.
Sometimes moves away.
Right, move away, and isolates the person, and tries to cut off the person from their family and friends, and maybe interferes with their job so they can't work anymore. And all kinds of interference on anything with the outside world, because they want, many batterers feel highly insecure, and also I found that many of them are highly dependent on that female. If we want to assume the majority is female, it can be the opposite, that the emotional dependence is great. All the eggs are in that woman's basket that this man owns. Now, I know gender can be different, but it doesn't look like the perpetrator is a dependent personality, but actually is very dependent emotionally on the one person. And that's why the need to control is so high.
From the outside looking in, it's always hard to tell, right? You can't tell whether a person walking down the street is experiencing something at the home, because you don't know that. But if you are in a community like a church or a community or any other kind of community, and you kind of know who this person is, and you start to notice some changes, one of the best tools that abusers use, and it's been emphasized here, is isolation. All right, you need to isolate this person, to isolate the person both from their familial relationships, their friendships, their jobs, financial isolations, and so all of that person's dependence is just towards that abuser. And that's why it makes it so difficult to leave. You just can't just walk away. And so if there was one factor that I've seen that is apparent in most of my clients' cases is isolation. And so if you have a friend or if you have someone that you work with you feel more isolated from you. Like, oh, I can't talk to her or him as well as I used to. We used to talk to each other all the time. Or like her phone, he calls or she calls this person constantly, all the time, even while we're at lunch. I mean, those are some indicators that there might be something going on in the home that might warrant a question.
I think it sounds like the parish secretary's talking to the lady, and there's a bruise, and the person can't really explain how the bruise got there. Or, hot weather and long sleeve shirt, and or the husband calls and the cell phone has, no, I'm at the parish office, I'm talking with so-and-so, things like this, signs that people in the church could pick up on, maybe follow up with a question. He says, oh, does that happen all the time? And he said, you open up a conversation, at least there's someone who has acknowledged there's something amiss here, and get at least an opening for the victim to start talking about it. May not take up on it, but may do so. That's what I'm kind of looking for, to see, are there those kind of signs, typical signs that people might pick up on if they're trained to do so, which I wasn't in the beginning, but now I am. So.
I also say be very cautious. If we're trying to educate people on how to help, listen. Don't get involved, or try not to get too involved too early. That could put yourself in harm's way. I can tell you stories of people we thought we were helping, and we rode into, on the horse to pull somebody out, and then I die and the wife dies or something like that. It's a very precarious situation. Right when someone is leaving is the most vulnerable time for everybody, or the escalated time. So be careful how you approach it, is what I'm saying.
And I can't believe you didn't say this, Biel. Drugs and alcohol are an obvious sign. Not to say that everybody who's a drunk will beat people around, but there is a relationship.
Oh, yes.
Between domestic violence and drug and alcohol abuse.
Yes, for sure. Goes hand in hand many times.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say also, I know hopping around on the subject, but do not be afraid to ask your daughters, your granddaughters, your grandsons, your sons, your grandmother, your sisters, your brothers, if you suspect they're stressed. Don't be afraid to say, have you ever been struck? Have you ever been? I think oftentimes we forget to ask. College students, military bases. I mean, violence is on the uprise. It's not going anywhere. It's increasing. And I'm very careful to ask who has guns? Who keeps guns under? That's what you have to be very careful of. Are there weaponry in households? And that's been on the rise. So you have to be very, very, very careful and discreet. But don't assume because feminism became popular in the 70s that your college daughter is not being hurt, or your college son is not being hurt.
Absolutely.
Be it sexual violence or otherwise. Mm-hmm. And there's much shame involved with being a victim. And so they have to really gain your trust, or vice versa, develop a rapport with them first. But do not be afraid to ask. I don't know, when my children were little, I don't know that I asked them when they were teens if their boyfriends ever, if I saw obvious signs, yes, but I don't know that that was a standard question way back. So just be thinking of some of that. Thank you.
Marty has a question, I believe. Marty?
It was in regard to, I think, is it Andrew on the
Yes.
end? When you made the statement that the abuser is imitating fact that he was abused, so it just goes on down the line. My question is, if there are sons in the family of a person being abused, does that, whatever age, they imitate what the adults do, how much of a problem is it for you dealing with the family that those little boys or those children treat the mother the same way the father did? Is that something you encounter?
You know, that's a really good question, and maybe I shouldn't say the word imitate. She should. I should. We do, as kids, we all learn. Let's just say this, you know, as
a crucial way of learning.
Right. So as
Modeling and imitation.
exactly.
You should say that word.
So, but I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. Obviously, you know, I'll say this from my experience working in family law, and I sat in Gail's shoes when I'm from Maryland originally. I was a prosecutor and I was handling cases just like Gail does up here. And what I've seen is that usually the children start to misbehave, right? It comes out in forms of aggression, okay? And it might be aggression in school. It might lead to juvenile delinquency. You know, it's generational in a sense that that's the behavior that you model, that person's model. And that person might not even realize that, because they hate it. They probably hated the way, you know, one parent treated the other. You know, but now it's kind of like ingrained in their head, and somehow I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I can't give you the medical explanation, but the statistics do show that those that have experienced domestic violence, either directly or indirectly by witnessing it in the family, affects their normal social behaviors with other people. And a lot of times it comes in the form of aggression. And so it's tough to say exactly how it turns out or why they do it that way. Or I guess a baseline answer is like they've seen it and that's what they know how to do and that's what they're going to do. And that's how they relate to other people. It comes down to, like you said, it's behavior modification, it's coping. Like, how do I deal with this particular stress or trauma that I've experienced in my life? And the only way that person has been educated to do that is to express his aggression, you know, and anger, and become violent. Where, you know, as for those who are more, you know, well-adjusted, we have other coping mechanisms to handle stressful situations, really tough, life-stressful situations, and it's not to lash out at your partner or your family member. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, so it's like the abuser who had been abused, and the children that are in that family are then modeling the behavior that they witnessed as a husband, father. They're doing the same thing, and it keeps on going.
Exactly. I think it just kind of feeds itself.
Yeah.
And also, in Ohio County, I can only speak for Ohio County because those are the only reports that I see, police reports. Anytime the police are called to a house for a domestic situation, a CPS referral has to be made. So now we also have CPS now involved. If there's children in the home, and even if they were upstairs sleeping, a CPS referral has to be made. And then we meet, there's a team of us that meet once a month, and we go through those police reports with CPS just to make sure that no one fell through the cracks, that the family's receiving services if they need those services, just to kind of check in on the kids. And there's also something called Handle with Care. When the police are called to a home and there's children involved, the police fill out a form and it just says, there was an incident at little Johnny's house last night. Handle him with care the next day at school. So those reports are faxed to the school, and it's just to give teachers they don't say the specifics of what happened, but just, handle little Johnny with care. They know something happened. So if he comes to school and he's angry or if he's tired, maybe he just needs to go hang out with the guidance counselor's office and take a little nap and, just handle him with care today. So I think Ohio County, from what I see, is pretty good with regarding the children and make sure that they receive services as well.
Yes.
unmet needs there are, which is what occurred to me immediately when you said, with knowledge, now you have a responsibility to be different. We know there's an unmet need for pet-friendly shelters, but what other unmet needs are there in the community that we need to take a look at?
One of the things that I've noticed is when someone is leaving the home, they have stuff, so they need help moving things out of that home. Very practical. Very practical. Like cell phones, they need some form of communication, not on the abuser's cell phone plan, so they can be free from that. The way that I view it is, you're trying to help this person release all the bonds from this abusive relationship, and those bonds are, and you can think of like, you know, the financials and things like that too.
I think with regard to unmet needs, I think it's individual. As Erica was pointing out, some of the things that when an abuser, not the abuser, the victim rather, is determined to leave, all the practical things, help with getting Social Security, help with getting identification, even identification card sometimes is lacking, help with transportation to the shelter or to some other place, and as help with packing up and helping, all those basic things that we sometimes think we forget about because we're accustomed to having them, need to be met and are huge for the victim, huge hurdles for the victim to overcome. So there's many factors, and I think that has to be looked at individually. There are agencies that kind of, like I say, will help with that in the community to identify some of those things and to try to meet those unmet needs. But it's basically to say this, and this, could be this, and this for me, or maybe just this and this for you, but it's got to be looked at individually. The biggest response that we have is to heighten the awareness that domestic violence is intolerable. It's intolerable. That's the most fundamental premise that I want to get out of.
One of the areas where I see a lot of unmet needs, and I don't know if there's even a solution, and I've been wrestling with this probably the past 5 or 6 years, is, and particularly in the Wheeling area, we have a unusually high population of homeless individuals. So I deal a lot with victims that are suffering from mental issues, maybe drug abusers, maybe prostitutes, and for the abusers to walk into some of our local tent cities, they could become gods because they know that these potential victims probably won't go to the police. If they do go to the police, they won't follow up. They're nearly impossible oftentimes to get a hold of to come to court. And if they do come to court, they're lacking in credibility because they have convictions for being a prostitute and drug addiction and drug, you know, and that's just because that somebody's got a mental disease or defect and maybe has engaged in sex trade in the past does not make them an open target to, you know, turn their life into a living hell. And I don't know what the solution to that problem is, but that's a huge problem I deal with on almost daily basis. And I've been.
A lot of people who are predatory for homeless people.
Oh my gosh, yeah. If you like to abuse people and you get off on the power and you don't mind living in, you know, in squalor, and a lot of people don't do that. It's you can become a god in these camps. You can do what you want, and you have free reign. And a lot of horrible things happen, and most of which don't get reported to authorities. It's, you know, I see people live down there that turn people's lives into a living hell.
I have to say, I have a little different take on it, I think, having lived around the country in various places. You recall that Jesus said, I don't know what the Catholic interpretation of this is, but Jesus said Thank you, I appreciate that. I know I can always rely on you, Bishop, to be helpful. Thank you. Jesus said, the poor you will always have with you, right? And some people think that means, well, there's always going to be poor, so we don't need to worry about them. When in fact, Jesus probably meant there's always going to be poor, so we always have to be aware of that and do something about it.
He said precisely before you always have with you, and you can help them whenever you want.
There you go. Yeah. And so the domestically abused you will always have with you. I am thankful in Ohio County that we do have a prosecutor who cares, that we do have a Y that has 10,000 people a year come through it, that we do have some adequate licensed clinical therapists that can be helpful to us, but understand that just because we have great services in our community doesn't mean this is going away. First of all, and second of all, we do have great services in our community that have to be paid for. So I'm going to step out of this role as the pastoral counselor for a minute, step into a board member's role and say, you know, you can always give money to the Y. We'll take your money anytime. I was just sitting here before we started listening to these folks talk about VOCA grants have now been cut by 30% nationwide. Most of these people are paid by VOCA grants. You know, you really want to do something for us? Call up your legislator and say, hey, buddy, we can't afford 30% cut here because domestic violence will always be with us. Help us.
That's right. Good point. Thank you.
But by and large, we've got some really good services in this community, and we should be grateful.
We do. We're very lucky.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? I think that this concludes our presentation for today. I want to thank these panelists for their time and thank the audience for being here. I also forgot to thank Rocco for the tremendous lunch earlier. If you have any other comments, please direct them to Jenny or I. If you want to send us something, we'll be happy to hear them. We're members of the Parish Council. I work with BL. You know who these people are. You can get in touch with them directly. They'll be open to your questions and to help you with anything. And thank you again for being here. Thank you.